Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you our third read of I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying by Youngmi Mayer. We continue to find out more about her life, one in which she talks about how she had to run a Kool-Aid stand, and yet there's a reference to someone else running a lemonade stand. And she does go into the difference in the privilege of what each means, but did you ever run a lemonade stand? Was there ever a business that you ran as a kid? And it doesn't have to be a lemonade stand, it could be like a bracelet business or some kind of business that you use to try to make money as a kid.
Definitely. When I think about making money as a kid, I started off with a sticker collection. And because I had so many stickers and my dad encouraged me to have these stickers, I would have extras. And because I had extras and no one needed it in the house, I would sell them.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, though, this was discouraged by my teacher, and I got in trouble. I had to give people's money back, and that was the end of my childhood business.
Mm. Do you remember how much money you had earned from it?
Yeah, I think I got about $5, and that was in quarters.
Mm-hmm. Which was a lot,
Mm-hmm.
especially as a kid,
Yeah.
because you could buy a lot with it at that point. Like you could buy ice creams and candies and other little toys with that
Mm-hmm.
kind of money. I don't remember having a specific thing like that. I would always do chores around the house. I would do things, and my parents would give me an allowance for doing that stuff. But I don't think I ever remember having a small business of any sort. I did start working when I was in middle school at like the school lunch lines, and that's how I'd start making a little bit of money.
Totally.
But yeah, other than that, I don't remember doing anything as a kid.
Did you ever think about selling things when you were younger?
No, I don't know. I have a lot of trouble remembering my early life, like my early
Hmm.
childhood.
Hmm.
Like, I don't remember a lot of what I did from when I was a baby till I don't remember a lot. But at least until like sixth grade, I remember certain instances, but I don't know what I did in between.
That's fair.
I do remember I made a really good PB&J for a class once when it was like a descriptive class, but that wasn't for money or anything. It was just a class assignment. But I guess I could have sold sandwiches. I'm really good at making sandwiches.
You're really good at making food.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the experiences that Youngmi Mayer talks about within this book, and we'll get more into this book. But before we do, let's go into our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Asian American Town. Asian American Town is a community organizer imagining Asian American centered spaces where it is most needed. They host events like Legendary Makers Market, as well as support other events and creatives in the community. You can learn more about Asian American Town's work through their website at asianamericantown.com and find them on Instagram at Asian American Town.
Yeah, and currently they're more located in the Portland area, but I know they have big ideals and lofty goals, so who knows, maybe they'll expand into larger territories at some point.
Absolutely.
But that is going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, so third read of I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying by Youngmi Mayer. So we've been learning more about her life. We started off with learning about her grandparents, then a little bit more about her mother. Then we kind of find ourselves learning about her, who she is, what she's been like growing up. And now we see more of her young adult life and
Mhm.
the transition from someone who was single to being married and then now having a child.
Definitely. And for this section, we read pages 129 through 201, and that was chapter 8, Strangers through 10, Poor. And a few trigger warnings for this section is abuse, rape, and drug use.
Right. And once again, we want to remind readers that this whole book kind of includes a lot of dark topics.
Mm-hmm.
So, just as an entirety of content, if this isn't something you're ready for, it may not be the right time or space for you. It's definitely something that I think you should read. It's definitely something that I think is beneficial to read to get a better understanding of a different person's life and experience.
Mm-hmm.
And Youngmi does such a good job in that. But let's go into one of the first things she talks about in this read, and that is the story of Hyungbu and Norbu. in that story, the concept is based around a poor brother and a rich brother.
Mm-hmm. And the story kind of shows that there's nothing wrong with being bad and there's nothing wrong with being not good.
Right. And this story is based on an old Korean folktale. And parts of it are that there's a rich brother who wasn't very kind when he was rich and kind of shunned off his poor brother.
Mm-hmm.
But the part that Youngmi kind of relates with more is the story of the poor brother, who was so poor that his wife and child, who he initially had passed away from being starved and not being able to make means.
Mm-hmm.
She seems to relate more with the character of that lost wife and child.
Right. She feels like, as women in particular, women and gender nonconforming and femme people, we tend to be forgotten. Just like in the story, Hyungbu and Nolbu, they both lived, even though they both received different trials. They ended up finding new wives, they ended up having new children and a new life.
Right.
Unlike the wives and children that both of them lost, they were kind of pushed to the wayside and away from the story.
Right. She then goes on to use this story to describe her life between rich and poor,
Mm-hmm.
one of which is that lemonade stand that we were talking about.
Right.
So she talks about how her mother gave her a Kool-Aid stand. The Kool-Aid stand for her, though, wasn't so that she could make money. It was, from her viewpoint, a way for her mother to tell her that she will always be a part of the poor people.
Mm.
The Kool-Aid stand was more of a punishment. It was more of a, look, this is what you have, this is all you deserve, and this is what you're going to get kind of mentality for young me.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side, she compares the lemonade stand for richer folks, specifically white folks, as a status symbol, as a way for them to be rewarded for something that doesn't require much effort.
And beyond that, it's not just being rewarded for doing something that doesn't take much effort. It's more the sign that you can make and create these fake businesses that mean very little and pretend like this is a way of making money, when in
Mm-hmm.
actuality, you are given so much in life and then you grow up to believe that you deserve all these things that you're given.
Right. So it's a similar business plan, but with two different ways of looking at it and growing up with it.
Right. I actually recently saw this news story as soon as I finished to read, and it was actually about this girl from Philadelphia.
Hmm.
And apparently she had sold lemonade, and she sold this lemonade within a couple of days to buy Taylor Swift tickets.
Interesting.
And I was like, there's no way, like knowing what Taylor Swift tickets cost, even
Yeah.
at face value, there's no way in a couple of days that this little girl could have possibly sold that much lemonade.
Right, unless she was selling them for $100 each.
Right. Which that in itself is a sign of privilege because
Right.
no one's going to buy lemonade reasonably for $100
Mm-hmm.
unless you're in LA in one of the fancy markets like Erewhon or something. But it was wild that we went from this story that Youngmi talks about, and literally within real time, within a news segment that I'm seeing on that same week, we see it still happen. We see the privilege. And this has kind of shaken me. Like, I can no longer see lemonade stands in the same way. I can't see lemonade stands now without the privilege of children just getting things that they want and less so learning how to deserve it or learning how to use that as a source of understanding how to generate income. I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know what the purpose of lemonade stands are. It seems like the parents just want the kids out of the house and will do anything to get them out.
Right.
But it just makes that experience that I have of seeing kids at lemonade stands a little bit different.
Definitely. Like, I think that what these parents think, and I'm only speaking from the viewpoint of an outsider because I don't have any children, but what I think is happening is that parents want to show these children, these fortunate children, that you have to work to get what you want, even though essentially they're not really working as much as they could be working to get whatever it is they want. For example, like getting a Nintendo system or getting Taylor Swift tickets. They obviously are not working that hard to get these things because if they were, they would be spending the whole year doing this.
Right, right. But for Youngmi, her bigger point was the privilege of the lemonade stand versus the demoralization of the Kool-Aid stand.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stuck with her for most of her growing life.
Right.
It's what kept her in the place that it always did. I mean, she never felt like she deserved more than Treasure Island. She never felt like she deserved more than the Tenderloin. Like, when people talk about bad places in this world, the Tenderloin in San Francisco is one of the big highlighted ones.
Mm.
For her to feel like she didn't deserve beyond that is a wild concept to me.
For real. I thought the same thing when I was reading that particular section. Like, she deserves the world, considering how, like, just considering how she's a person. As a person, she deserves more than just the bare minimum.
Well, I think we all, for all intents and purpose, deserve more than the bare minimum. Like
Absolutely.
no one should be pushed down, no one should be shoved to the ground.
Absolutely.
But this, in a sense, was what created this bond between her and her then husband, Danny Bowen.
Mm-hmm.
So Danny Bowen, who is now a well-known, amazing chef who has done segments with Anthony Bourdain, who has had a restaurant in the Mission District of San Francisco, who has really created a massive name for himself beyond the culinary world, but also
Mm.
within the newsprint of GQ and I think a couple of others. But he started from a place of squalor, just like Young Mi had.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of created a bond between them, knowing that they were kept under a socioeconomic umbrella that kept them down in the dirt.
Right. And this is where they started their bond. But what eventually happened was with the fame that Danny got, with the start of a really famous restaurant, their luck had changed and they were starting to become wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But with that wealth came turmoil, it came a separation of ideals, and eventually it became the split between Danny and Youngmi.
Right, because at that point they were now viewing themselves as different.
Right.
With Youngmi, she still saw herself as a poor person living a rich life. And Danny, according to Youngmi, Danny was a rich person who started off poor.
Right. He believed that he was just in circumstances that he shouldn't have been in, and now he was in the correct spot and position.
Mm-hmm. So this makes me wonder, how do you see yourself and how do you view wealth and fame?
For me, I actually always thought of myself as being bigger than. Like, I've always thought of myself as, in some ways, being destined for a position of creating change or a position of leadership or something like that. I feel like for me, when I haven't been in those positions, I've always felt out of place.
Hmm.
And so that's always reflected in the way that I would communicate or even just carry myself in those roles.
Hmm.
But once I finally saw myself in positions that kind of carried a little bit more weight, I think I felt more like myself.
Hmm.
In terms of wealth and fame, I think maybe previously I wanted fame,
Hmm.
but now I don't really care about that. I don't really want the spotlight. I would love wealth. I do really love shoes, so wealth would be a good thing. I love travel. All the things that I love doing, I think would require wealth. I think for the way that I view my life and what I see myself having, owning, or wanting to manifest, it requires wealth. So I guess in a sense, I'm expecting myself at some point to have that kind of money.
Definitely. I see where you're coming from. For me, on the other hand, I've grown up thinking of myself as Cinderella, that I have to keep working hard and doing menial jobs before I grow up to be the princess. So, in terms of wealth and fame, I still feel like I can only acquire wealth if I become famous. So, for some reason, in my mind, money doesn't come from working hard, but comes from people noticing me, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah. And like, I guess to add on to a little bit of what you were saying, is I think I also always felt that way. So even though I feel like at some point I'm meant to be wealthy or I'm meant to have money, I think the way I truly view myself is in a position where I'm always going to be working to get
Mm,
money. Like, I'm always going to be someone who expects to be wealthy, but in actuality, going to be the person that's working to try to get wealthy.
totally, I see that.
This whole dissonance between wealth between her and Danny, like we said, eventually becomes a split.
Mm-hmm.
Youngmi then goes on to divorce him. She ends up once again in a place of squalor, a place where she doesn't have money. But at least seems so much happier,
Yes.
and she feels like she's herself again.
Mm-hmm.
There's some discussion in the book about how they decided to continue their lives past the marriage. She talks about how they end up in different groups of people that maybe are more recognizable to their inner selves.
Mm-hmm.
But in the largest sense, it seems like Youngmi has once again found who she was,
Yeah.
which is not to lack the mention that she also finds herself with a new child.
Yeah.
She finds herself with a new role as a mother, and I don't know, it seems like she thrives in it.
Right. And when she becomes a mother, that's when she feels special again because if the child that she bore is special, then she must be special herself.
Right, right. Speaking of which, she also talks about this animalistic relationship between her and her ancestors, a little bit more specific to her and her mother.
Mm-hmm. And she kind of says that it's something that Koreans share. Do you believe that's true?
I don't know. I mean, I love my mom. I had a different relationship with my mom just because of the way we grew up in terms of her always needing to work.
Mm.
So I actually didn't grow up with my mom around me as often as I think most people did.
Mm.
It's not to say that I've ever felt disconnected from her. She put in a lot of effort to just be a mother. Like, on top of work, on top of being a wife, taking care of the household, she put in a ton of work to make sure that she could take care of me. And
Mm.
I think for me, it's always felt like that was what I was connected to, was the fact that she was such a strong caregiver. And even with the limited time that she had, one of the people that showed me the most love that I think I will or could have ever experienced.
Mm.
So I'm not sure about the animalistic effect, but I definitely feel like a lot of what I do is, in a sense, driven by my mother, but through her actions.
For sure, for sure. When I think about Filipinx attachment to their mothers, I think of the opposite. Rather than child attached to mother, I think of the mother attached to the child or to the children. Like growing up, a lot of my friends didn't have any attachment to their mother. But I could see from the way that they were cared for that their mothers had a lot of attachment to them. Like when my group of friends came to the lunch table, we all had really good food. And that's because our moms were the ones who prepared it for us. Unlike other kids had to buy lunch or they had to make food for themselves or make food for themselves and their siblings. But for us, our mothers definitely wanted to show that they loved us,
Mhm.
even though we may not have had the same appreciation for our mothers.
Yeah, I mean, I think till this day, there's a strong part of me that wants to take care of my mom. And
Mm.
I think this now comes from the framework of that switching role within the child parent relationship where the caregiver role gets placed from the parent back to the child.
For sure.
So for me, I want to see my mom happy. I want to see her thrive. Also, because I think within the patriarchal role of where she came from, I don't think she was allowed those opportunities. So I
Mm.
think all that is reason why I want to give her the best life. But she definitely was the type to also attach onto us. I think a
Mm.
lot of her identity, a lot of who she describes herself as a person, is our mother. She has gone out of her way to do wild things for me and my brother. Like, I think I've talked about it on this podcast before, but when my brother was living about 4 to 5 hours away, no, it was more like 5 to 6 hours, my mom would pack two coolers, like giant, massive igloo coolers full of food that she had been preparing for like 2 weeks and then freezing just to take to my brother so he had food for, I don't know, like a month or something. Like,
Mm.
that's the kind of love that my mother has always shown to us. And that's why I feel like for me, it's not animalistic, it's appreciative love.
For sure.
It's just noticing how much effort she put into our lives so that I want to give that back.
Absolutely. I think of the same thing with my mom. Like, even though our relationship is tumultuous, even though we don't see eye to eye sometimes, knowing that my mom suffered through turmoil and tried her best to give us the best, she deserves it all. She deserves to live her dreams and to live the life that she wanted for herself.
Right. And this goes a little bit beyond our read and what we just read.
Mm-hmm.
But listening to Youngmi talk about her son, it seems like Youngmi is creating that similar attachment that we have.
Mm.
She is going out of her way to be the best mom that she could be. She is making an attempt to grow from her past experiences. She's trying to shed the generational traumas. She tells different stories on her podcasts about scenarios and situations that she's had with her son,
Mm-hmm.
having frustrations. Like, we now, as older individuals, get to see the adulthood of parenting.
Yeah.
We get to see how stupid parents are coming from our friends and how vulnerable they are, but how loving and caring and all of that stuff that goes into being a parent. But now we see what parents are, and they're just kids that are older.
Yes.
And I think from that, we see young me becoming this mother that maybe doesn't need an animalistic attachment because she's creating that bond through her sheer will.
Yes.
This is kind of where we'll leave things off for this read.
Mm-hmm.
We are continuing to learn more about her. We've now delved into her earlier adulthood, and we're starting to enter maybe the more current phases that she's living in.
Yes.
It seems like that may be the direction of where we're going with this book, and maybe what we'll see in our final read.
Mm-hmm. And in our fourth and final read, we will be reading pages 202 through 244. That's chapter 11, Eternity, through chapter 14, Life.
Yep. And we know y'all haven't had a chance to read this book yet. If you need more information on how to get it or where you can purchase it, you can definitely check out Youngmi's website and everything, which we'll provide in our last episode.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also feel free to contact us. And how can people do that?
Y'all can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or join the conversation on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
We also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, which has our bookstore that have books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye!